Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give everyone about a minute or so to join us in this virtual space. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and maybe offer some thoughts on the eclipse this week as a fun little icebreaker. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started to keep us moving along today. Feel free to keep introducing yourself in the chat. But welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's conference and for this session with the ECMC Foundation on their Basic Needs Initiative. I hope you were able to hear a number of our sessions this morning, and the session that just concluded, our keynote with Dr. Sarah Goldrick-Rab. So many important things that she shared about how we should think about and act on supporting our students. My name is Lisa Castillo Richmond. I have the great honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Partnership for College Completion. We're thrilled to have so many of you joining us throughout the day today, our fellow equity practitioners, some of who have been longstanding partners to the PCC, as well as new colleagues from colleges and universities across Illinois and across the country. For those of you who may not be as familiar with our work, the PCC is an Illinois nonprofit organization that is working to advance higher education equity so that all Illinoisans can truly have equal opportunities to access, afford, and complete a college education, leading to greater degree attainment, racial equity, and socioeconomic mobility in our state. We do that by partnering with colleges and universities to support their institutional change efforts, advancing supportive state policy, and building a community of advocates, and elevating actionable data and research. We're grateful to the ECMC Foundation for their support of today's Virtual Equity Institute and their support of our institutional change work over time. Their support has enabled us to make strides toward fostering equity change on campuses across the state through our Illinois Equity and Attainment Initiative, which launched in 2018. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next guest speaker, Ireri Rivas Mier Teran, Program Officer at the ECMC Foundation. Ireri oversees a portfolio of grants focusing on supporting and addressing basic needs for post-secondary students from underserved backgrounds. Welcome, Ireri, and thank you for your time and support of our work.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm so grateful for the invitation. As Lisa mentioned, ECMC Foundation has been a supporter of PCC for some time now, and I personally really look up to the staff and all of the work they're doing. So thank you for the invitation and allowing me to share some of our work and time together with you. As Lisa mentioned, I oversee the Basic Needs Initiative at ECMC Foundation. Quick fun fact, I actually used to live in Chicago and used to be a student affairs practitioner. So I definitely try to remember to bring that lens, bring the student perspective to my work with the foundation. And I'm super thrilled to be able to chat a little bit more with you about what that looks like. So I'll start off telling you a little bit about the foundation, about what we've done, and then I'm hoping that we can leave plenty of time for questions as well. So first, a little bit about ECMC Foundation. We are a national post-secondary funder, which means we fund exclusively higher education projects and initiatives. And the focus there is really to support efforts that reduce challenges that many students face, of course, with a particular focus on first-generation students, lower income students, and students of color, among many others. We believe that everyone should have the ability to succeed if higher education is a tool that they're looking to leverage for their career success. Next slide, please. And for those of you who might have seen it, I think it came out on social media. We, as a foundation, recently released a new North Star, which essentially is another way for us to articulate our mission and vision to really align the work that we're doing on the ground. For those of you who might have followed the foundation before, we're really not changing any of our grant making, but really doubling down on that is important, as I mentioned, supporting efforts that really elevate student success. So next slide. So wanted to start with some of the data that we're using at the foundation, particularly for our basic needs initiative, to inform our efforts around grant making in the area. Next slide, please. So as some of you probably saw, last year was the first year that data on food insecurity and housing insecurity of post-secondary students was released by the federal government. That's the number at the top. It comes from the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, or NPSAS, as we call it. And they really did a national scope. And as you can see here, it shows that about 6.5 million students across the nation were experiencing at least one type of basic needs insecurity at the time that the data was collected. As a note, the data was fielded in 2020. So we expect these numbers to have changed to be, really reflective of just that particular time and frame. And again, we expect many changes to come. We also really relied on information from opt-in surveys, including the Hope Center and the Trellis survey. So those are the other two data points you see on this slide. As an example of what Trellis survey does, they do a student financial wellness survey. In particular, the example I have here for 2021, they focus on MSIs, and they found that almost 2/3 of their students faced at least one type of basic needs insecurity. And then the Hope Center, as I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with, does a similar survey at a national level where students continue to share their experiences with basic needs insecurity. What I wanted to point out from the 2020 survey that they did is that students' experiences and what they bring to campus also really inform what kind of basic needs security they have. As we can see from the numbers here, students who have experience in the foster care system, those who are parenting, students who are non-binary, or students of color from certain groups are the most likely to have higher rates of basic needs insecurity. So also important for us to keep in mind as we're addressing the issue on our campus. The other thing I wanted to share as far as the national data goes is that, as you probably can see, there are some gaps and limitations. Most of these tools only look at food and housing security, but we know that basic needs and security happens concurrently. So if a student might be experiencing mental health challenges, they might be tied to housing insecurity. They might also be experiencing food insecurity, transportation insecurity. So it's important for us to keep that in mind. Also, the other thing I wanted to point out is that we, at least at the foundation, always sort of anticipate that the numbers reported out are actually higher on campus. And this can be largely due in part to the fact that stigma still plays a really high role in how students talk about their experiences, in how we ask about them, and how campuses are responding. So thinking about prevalence overall on our campus nationally, we are of the mind that the numbers are probably higher than what we see here. Next slide, please. And then I would be remiss not to give a shout out to all of the amazing work that has already taken place at this level in Illinois. Just a quick shout outs to the benefits navigators, the fact that student parent data is now being collected or will now be collected, the fact that housing liaisons are now being implemented on campus, and of course, veteran student centers and undocumented student liaisons have been around for some time. I also wanted to maybe ask for all of you who might have something to share, if you click next, to let us know what on your campus or what you're seeing from your peers works really well. Again, from my time in Chicago, I know there are some campus-specific efforts that deserve a shout out. I am thinking particularly of Dominican University Student Care Network that also uses one application for all of their resources, and students can easily fill it out and obtain information and resources. And also Urbana-Champaign's Orange Room, which among many things also includes a family study session or study room where students can bring in their children and they can sort of study together or hang out together at the same time. So maybe I'll give us a quick second if you're interested to share what your campus or other campuses you've seen are doing really well when it comes to supporting on students' basic needs. Maybe we'll just keep going on. If you think of something, definitely feel free to share it. Okay, Gabriella is sharing food pantries. Yes, excellent. I know that's certainly been around. Thanks, Gabriella. Okay, next slide, please. And next. Okay, so now I'll share more of what ECMC Foundation is actually doing, and we can get into it. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay. So ECMC Foundation defines basic needs and security to be the lack or the fear of a lack of resources. And I wanted to particularly point that out because from what we've seen, I know you see it on your campus too, even fearing that you're going to lack one of these resources will have similar negative outcomes on a student's and their family's lives. So even having to worry about potentially running out of food, potentially having unreliable transportation, potentially having to figure out housing in the middle of a semester, is just as disruptive. ECMC Foundation also is pretty aware that our understanding in the field is evolving, that even though we've been working on this for quite some time, you all have been working on this for years. There's also evolving thinking and additional information, particularly as students share more of their experiences, and we're keeping open the areas of support that we include in the definition. Next slide, please. So we started funding in the basic needs space in 2018, formally. That's when we started thinking about it in those terms. And then in 2019, the foundation officially launched the Basic Needs Initiative. We often internally talk about the grants made that year as the BNI 7 because it was 7 grantees, but you all know what happened just a few months after. And we ended up really increasing our commitment, both in the number of grantees and the amount of funding committed, but also strategically as a tool that we were thinking to really leverage post-secondary student success. So we had the initiative already, and 2023 was the year that we said, okay, let's start thinking about what makes sense next. for the foundation, where could we, with the resources that we have, try to support efforts that will make longer term systemic change. And what I'll share with you as far as the upcoming strategy in just a few minutes is really reflective of that sort of thinking and ambition for the future of grant making. But before I get to that, I wanted to share a few highlights from grantees, both current and past, whose efforts have been really impactful, not only to the field, but also in shaping the new strategy for the foundation. Next slide, please. So I'll start with Ithaca SNR. They are a national research and strategy nonprofit that provides support for higher education and cultural communities and helping them with tools and assessments to really make informed decisions. They worked with us on putting together a basic needs data guide. And I wanted to highlight this because this was really one of the early instances that we saw a national nonprofit thinking about data use when it came to basic needs of post-secondary students. And as you'll see in a few minutes, that really resonated with ECMC Foundation. So what Ithaca SNR did was carry out their holistic measures of student success research to think about what basic needs meant. And then what they did more specifically is went around and surveyed provosts nationally to better understand what practices they were using and perspectives they had on the use, the collection, the analysis of basic needs data for their students. And some of what they found works best for campus, you see on their slide. For starting, they noted leadership has to clearly articulate basic needs as an institutional priority. That has to be at the core. You have to have your provost, you have to have your presidents, your VPs really champion the fact that you need to know what's happening in your campus and you need data in order to get to that point at an institutional level. For early planning, they really found that engaging students early on, incorporating not only their data, but their experiences and feedback was essential to success. For collecting data, Ithaca SNR found that centralizing who and what at your campus does that is really the way to go. And also encouraging you to connect with other institutions who've already done this, to not reinvent the wheel. For cultivating data, their point here was really to tie basic needs data to academic outcomes. And I would suggest not only academic, but also the non-academic outcomes. Not only have the information sit within your basic needs resource center, but as you are making this an institutional priority, really be able to tell that story more fully. And then for formalizing and advocating, they really suggest cross-institutional data use and advocacy. But what I also wanted to share about this particular grantee project is some of the nuggets of information they got from talking with staff on campuses. The first one is that language matters. As I shared earlier, there's a lot of stigma still. And what they found is that asking students directly about whether they're homeless or food insecure will actually yield a significantly undercount of the students actually facing these challenges. So students will say, if you ask them, are you homeless? Are you housing insecure? They'll say no. So instead, asking about couch surfing or living out of your car or crashing on your friend's couch will yield a much more accurate picture of the student experience and the range of students facing homelessness in this example. The other example I wanted to share with you comes from Amarillo College. I know that particular institution has already been shared. Sorry, this is still the previous slide. And Amarillo College actually has a culture of care that they embed throughout their institution. But what they did is they created their own centralized automated data collection tool that was tied to that initial assessment tool. And students fill out one single questionnaire. They receive a response within 24 hours. And what Amarillo College found was that students who received assistance after filling out this form were 7% percentage points higher in their retention rate than their overall college retention. So that's significant just with this one intervention. And then the other thing that Ithaca found is that you have to respond quickly. I know we talked a bit about that in the previous fire chat conversation. Within 24 hours or less is the ideal time frame in order to really have positive outcomes for students. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to also share Auburn University's model, even though I heard some of you might not be as fond of food pantries. Auburn University worked to develop and implement the Hunger Solutions Institute, which is nice. An institute that systematically built the capacity of institutions in Alabama to tackle food insecurity. So not just food pantries, but food insecurity more broadly. And then of course, what they found was that this was a perfect starting point. And most of the campuses that participated in the Hunger Solutions Institute used this as a jumping off point to talk about and address basic needs of their students more broadly. What I wanted to share about Auburn University and this particular initiative is that they really engage the student perspective, experience, and voice from the beginning, and really use that to develop and implement the supports at each campus. So even though it was a cohort of 10 who were receiving similar technical assistance, who were collecting data in the same way, what made this particular intervention so successful was that each campus was able to determine what was best for their students based on what their students shared. So quick examples is that one institution had a benefits one-stop hub that included a food pantry. Another institution found that they were really sprawled out as a campus, and to have one single location would make it really difficult for students to secure resources. So they created a mobile food pantry. So literally a little van went around and had different stops each day of the week. Another institution heard from their students that they wanted the resources to be really easily and visibly located. So they put their resource center in the student union. But on the other hand, another institution found that their students wanted to be super discreet and wanted tons of privacy. So they located their resources in the basement of a building. So again, just examples of different approaches with similar results, but really centering students' needs and experiences. Next slide, please. And then the final grantee spotlight I wanted to share at this point is United Way. In particular, the Spark Point Community Colleges. This was a group of community colleges in the Bay Area in California who partner with United Way to implement their Sparks Point Centers program. This program is, again, a one-stop shop, particularly focused on families and students with families and financial coaching. So students who came to this program were paired with a financial coach that worked with them one-on-one intensively to meet their basic needs, link them to benefits, resources. They work with them to increase their income, build credit, increase our savings, and reduce debts. And as you can see from the slides, students who participated in the program had extremely positive academic outcomes. And I'll add, their families also had super positive financial outcomes. Next slide, please. So all of this to share, all of the data I just shared, the national data, state-based, grantee lessons and highlights. We took these insights and put them together as we were building out the new strategy for the Basic Needs Initiative. And I just wanted to share additional considerations that again came up to the forefront as we were doing this analysis. I'll share just a few because I think we're getting close to time. I think that's right. Partnerships are essential, right? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share with you the example of United Way. As I mentioned, we have multiple grantees who work with them, and they've always had excellent results in their student outcomes. But we also still need data to be able to tell not only what students are experiencing on campus, but what actually works. Being able to say, is that food pantry really the best resource, or is it linked to SNAP or something else? And being able to share that and being able to link it to academic outcomes is essential. As we heard before, the gap between need and use of resources remains high. Again, there are a lot of different factors there, but multiple things that we can consider is thinking about stigma, thinking about eligibility guidelines and application guidelines. And then finally, on a positive note, we have found really positive connections between using a resource and student academic outcomes. As we saw in Spark Point, retention, graduation, transfer rates are increased. From other grantees work, we see that GPA, credits attempted, and other non-academic outcomes also benefit greatly. Next slide, please. So now what is new for ECMC Foundation's Basic Needs and Security? Let's get into it, and I'll try to go quickly, but again, we'll have Q&A time for you to ask questions. Next slide, please. So overarching goal, we know this is ambitious. We are really focusing on reducing the number of students who are facing basic needs and security in higher education. We have a longer term goal looking at 2023 and hoping that we can leverage a lot of partners, both at the institutional, at the state and federal level to help get to this goal. This is not just our goal, but we feel this is something that the field and the post-secondary ecosystem as a whole can help us achieve. And so we have 3 grant-making focus areas to get to that place. Next slide, please. And yeah, go ahead and just click through. There should be 3. Okay, that's it right there. So the first is growing data capacity. As I mentioned a little bit before, we want to really support the post-secondary ecosystem in not only better understanding what students are facing when it comes to basic needs, but in really understanding what are the resources, the interventions that will have those positive academic and non-academic outcomes. Right now, we're really excited about state longitudinal data systems, but we know there are other opportunities in growing data capacity of states in particular, because we want to be able to cross-reference what happens in higher ed, how does that impact the workforce, what additional agencies or stakeholders beyond higher education could play a role. Then we have scaling effective practices. For this grant-making focus area, we're really thinking about using what we know already works. So a good example of that are public benefits, SNAP, other federal or state level programs that are there. We know the students who use them work, but maybe we just need to update their eligibility requirements. Maybe we need to help these agencies better understand what our students are facing in order to change the application processes. Or maybe we just need to also share better data and learn from each other to, again, make this more student friendly. And the final grant making strategy is informing policy reform. And as a funder, our focus here is really in educating and increasing awareness of what students are facing, not necessarily determining what policies need to be implementing, but we're also thinking about institutional, state, and federal level opportunities that promote student success. Good examples of what fit into what we're thinking for informing policy reform often include research projects, because we usually need some of that data at the state level, at a national or regional level to point out opportunities for change. Next slide, please. And ultimately, we just want to increase the student experience. We want to ensure equitable use of services and resources, and really focus on academic and non-academic success of post-secondary students. Next slide, please. And finally, a quick call to action again. So with the data capacity piece, an example I have to share with you is Kentucky stats. They're not our direct grantee, but Kentucky is one of the few states that has a super robust state longitudinal data system. They have more than 20 agencies, including their higher education system, sharing data on a regular basis. They're actually working with their Student Success Center and starting to collect and think about data that they can use to pinpoint basic needs for post-secondary students. Highly suggest you take a look at their work, and their staff is also so generous in their time. They're always more than willing to help share what they're doing. Next slide, please. For effective practices, I wanted to shout out Student Defense and Mile 2 Consulting. For those of you who were at the fireside chat, Mile 2 Consulting is the entity conducting the Medicaid research that Sarah referenced. Please go on their website. They're currently surveying community colleges in their use or their awareness of Medicaid for their students, and they could use all of the information. So if you haven't participated or are not sure if your campus has participated, please take a look. And then Student Defense is working on creating partnerships across agencies to make FAFSA application and enrollment easier. One of the things they recently did and are looking at is completely eliminating the interview requirement. They're also looking at just easier onboarding into the program as soon as students fill out a FAFSA or other financial aid document in their campus. Next slide, please. And then for informing policy reform, as I shared, research is often a good example of the first step. And I wanted to give a shout out to the University of California, Irvine. They're a current grantee whose work is currently focusing on better understanding the experience of undocumented students and students from mixed status families in accessing or even being aware of basic needs resources. So we anticipate that the data could be used to inform policies, whether it be at the campus level or otherwise, to better serve the student population. Next slide, please. So that was all I had to share with you. I think we might have some time for questions. I love questions or comments, but also would love to just hear more about what you're doing on your campus if you're so inclined, and have this more as a discussion and conversation. So I'll stop here and I think hand it over to Mercedes, right?
Hi, yes, thank you, Ireri, for your time here. Thank you for sharing the great work that ECMC is doing and also the great work that you're doing around the Basic Needs Initiative. We're excited that, you were able to share today. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, and that's why I was like, you could continue, with your session, make sure that, folks connect with you. I know you've also were really active on the HUBA platform, asking folks questions about what they're doing in their institutions to better support students. And we do have, as you know, one of your grantees from the Basic Needs Initiative will have a session following this one, in case folks wanted to learn more about what they're doing in Michigan, right? So again, I do thank everyone for your time. I'm not sure if Ireri has anything else that she would like to share before we close, because we only have like 3 more minutes before the session concludes.
Yeah, I would definitely say, I think you're able to ask me questions through the platform for at least a little bit, even after today's session. So please feel free to do so. If you are interested in submitting a grant proposal, ECMC Foundation has an open LOI, letter of interest process, which means you can submit something at any time in the year. And we review every single one of the proposals that gets submitted. So I guarantee you'll have at least one set of eyes on your ideas and proposals. And yeah, thanks so much for your time.
Again, thank you, everyone. We still have one more concurrent session that I want to make sure that, one more concurrent session time block. Give me a second so I can show you all that. I want to make sure that everyone's aware that we still have one more concurrent session. Here you go. And we only have about 10 minutes of a break, and then you'll go on to the next concurrent session. You decide between 2, right? And again, this is one, and then you'll decide between another one as well. And then in that same time block, we will do the closing that ends at 3. Okay, so again, thank you everyone for your time, for joining us. Please feel free to choose one of the 2 concurrent sessions in the next 10 minutes and join. And I hope you've had an engaging virtual conference. And again, we'll connect in a couple more minutes. Thank you, everyone.